Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Numerics with Nadia. In today's video, we're going to go over negative exponents and some other rules that we need to solve for negative exponents. If you guys haven't watched my last video on the introduction to exponents, I would highly encourage you guys to watch that video first. I'll go ahead and tag it here before getting into today's lesson. For our lesson today, we will first off define what negative exponents are, and then our practice section will be split into two parts. First, we'll learn how to simplify negative exponents, and then we'll learn and we'll practice how to rewrite negative exponents using the reciprocal rule. So before we get into all of this, let's first off define what negative exponents even are. A negative exponent indicates the reciprocal of a base raised to the positive power of the same number. So essentially, if you flip the fraction and change the sign of an exponent to positive, it basically just means you're dividing by a number instead of multiplying by it repeatedly as with a positive exponent. So we'll go through what this looks like and the notation of it in just a second, but a negative exponent just represents the reciprocal of a base raised to the corresponding exponent. So as you'll see here, a to the negative n, a being our base, negative n being our exponent, is the same as 1 over a to the n. So we flip our fraction and we change the sign of our exponent to positive. So basically a to the negative n is the reciprocal of a to the n. And a quick note here, this only applies for when a, our base, does not equal 0. So those are our rules for negative exponents. We've gone through the definition by words, we've gone through the notation and the exceptions. And now we'll get into some rules for negative exponents. The first rule we will go over is called the reciprocal rule, and that's what we have used to define what a negative exponent is. So when we have a raised to the negative n, so a positive base, a negative exponent, that is just the same as the reciprocal. So a to the negative n equals 1 over a to the n. Our second rule here is the multiplication rule. So if you have a raised to the negative m multiplied by a to the positive n, unlike in our other example where we would add our exponents, since one is negative, we would take our positive exponent, a to the n, and then we would just subtract. So it would be a to the n minus m. So that is the multiplication rule. And now for our division rule, if we had a to the m divided by a to the n, what would we do with the exponents? Well, since they have the same base, what we would do here is we would take the exponent of the top and subtract it from the exponent on the bottom. So it would be a to the m minus n. And a quick note for this one is that for the division rule, it would include cases where m is less than n. So even if the exponent of our numerator is less than the denominator, we will still subtract. So I would highly encourage you guys to copy down the definition of what a negative exponent is, as well as these three rules into your notebook. Feel very strong on them because these are the foundation and this is what we're going to be needing for the rest of our practice section today. Our practice section for today's lesson will be split up into two parts. We're going to start off with part 1. The directions for part 1 say to convert the following to positive exponents. So for this series of practice questions, we will be given negative exponents and we'll have to convert them to positive exponents. So for number 1, we are given 4 to the power of negative 3. So what rule are we going to use to convert 4 to the negative 3 to have a positive exponent? We're going to use the reciprocal rule. When we apply the reciprocal rule, we get that 4 to the negative 3 equals 1 over 4 cubed. And if we evaluate and simplify the bottom, we would just have 1 over 4 times 4 times 4. We know that 4 times 4 gives us 16, so it would be 1 over 16 times 4. I'll do 16 times 4 on the side here for you guys. 16 times 4 gives us 64, so our answer, our simplified answer to 4 to the negative 3 would be 1 over 64. And now we'll move on to our second practice question for this section. For number 2, we have 1 over x to the negative 5. Again, we would be using the reciprocal rule here. When we do that, we have to take the reciprocal again. Even though it's in the denominator, what's going to happen is that x to the negative 5 will come up to our numerator. So our answer for number 2 would just be x to the 5th. And now we'll move on to number 3. For number 3, this one's a little bit trickier. We have x to the negative 2 times y cubed. Again, we would use the reciprocal rule here. Since they're being multiplied, what we would do is we would keep the y cubed on the numerator and take the reciprocal of x to the negative 2. So our answer for number 3 would be y cubed over x squared. And that wraps up our first series of practice sections for part 1. Now we'll move on to part 2. The directions for part 2 say to just simplify the following. So since we've already done practice with the reciprocal rule, these questions will be using the multiplication rule and the division rule. So for number 1, we have 5 to the negative 3 times 5 squared. In this one, we'll use the multiplication rule. What we'll do is we'll take the one with our positive exponent, 5 squared, and subtract the negative exponent. So it would be 5 to the power of 2 minus 3. When we do that, we get 5 to the negative 1. And we know that 5 to the negative 1, we would use our reciprocal rule again here, and that would just give us 1 over 5. So 1 over 5 would be our simplified answer for number 1. Now we'll move on to number 2. For number 2, we have 5 squared over 5 to the 4th. This is basically the division rule. So we know that 5 squared over 5 to the 4th is the same as 5 squared minus 5 to the 4th. So if we go through and subtract out these exponents, we get 5 to the negative 2. And again, we want to keep everything with positive exponents for our answer. So 5 to the negative 2 is the same as 1 over 5 squared. And we know that 1 over 5 squared is just 1 over 25. So our answer for number 2 would be 1 over 25. And now we'll move on to our third and final practice problem for today. For number 3, we have x to the negative 4 times x to the 5th. So for this one, we would be using our multiplication rule here. So we'll go through and subtract our exponents. When we do that, we'll get x to the 5 minus 4. We know that 5 minus 4 just gives us 1. X to the 1 is just the same as x. So our answer for number 3 is just x. And that wraps up our practice sections for today, and that wraps up our lesson for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope the rules of exponents make a little bit more sense. Please feel free to comment any questions or any other video topics you would like to see down below. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, share this video with a friend, and I will see you guys next time.